plenary session today. Hold on, now I'm going to muck things up. I'm just going to check. Okay. Some of you in the plenary session would have seen a little bit about our program, All Come Out to Play. Yes? A program that's been going for 6 years, and the focus of the program is about respectful relationships and gender equality. And so we thought that this is a really good topic to talk about, because how do we talk about this to children? Well, we do it in the program and All Come Out to Play, but there's probably some other things to discuss and to extract and to take home. And that's the idea of today. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our panel and our panellists. The first person you've met today, Dorothy Scott. So come again. Take chair. The next person you might have seen around, she is a colleague of Sally Smith, Liz Ursay, and she is from Scotland. And so it doesn't sound like Sally. Yes. But Liz has a really extensive background in social work, so it'll be interesting to hear her perspective. And last but not least is Dominic Alford, who's from Relationships Australia Victoria. Dom. And I've been fortunate to be part of a few things in partnership with Dom and some others, all about dads and fathers. And so Dom spends a lot of his time, or most of his time, or all of his time actually, in that area. So welcome to our panel, thank you. Yeah. And to facilitate the panel, we are really excited to welcome Jacinta Parsons. Some of you may know her. I said I'm not going to give you a big introduction, other than to say you're awesome. Oh, sorry, this is your microphone. So I don't need to provide a whole spiel about Jacinta, but Jacinta we had a really good conversation the other day about what this is all about, and I'm sure this is going to be a really fascinating discussion, so thank you.
Thanks, everybody. I feel like I'm on a dating show and screens about, and I would say yes to you, Dorothy. I would say yes. It's so nice to be here. What's really interesting about today, I mentioned it to Danny, I was just at Respect Victoria down the road, and they were talking about the great need that they believe that there is for grassroots connection to the story of gendered violence and all the areas that surround that. And I mentioned I was coming here and everyone was high-fiving at the prospect of this kind of conversation happening at such an important and crucial part of the community, places where people feel safe and welcome to come and participate. But it's such an important place as well to be having these kind of conversations. So today's panel, we're digging into how we ensure children and families have the best support in our playgroups to advocate for themselves and others in early year setting. What does consent, agency, and privacy actually look like? And how can these core values be embedded into our settings? How do we continue to meet the challenges of an ever-evolving technological space as well? And what is the impact of our digital footprint? What do we need to consider when that footprint belongs to one of our children? Joining you has already been introduced, but I'll give them an esteemed introduction, of which I am expecting rousing and embarrassing applause. It's good to see you over there on the right-hand side. We love you over there. Just want you to know you're cared for, as are you over there on the left. Please make Dorothy very welcome. She joins us. In her incredible capacity. Now I look through and realise I didn't actually write their bios on my piece of paper. So Dorothy, your extreme and very deep understanding of this space over so many years, your loving commitment to it is going to be wonderful to have this conversation today. As well, of course, we've got Liz, who joins us from an extensive experience. You've heard a little bit about it earlier in the day from your colleague. And Dominic, that's going to open up that question around what we do with our little people into that broader community conversation as well. So I look forward to it. Dorothy, yes, go crazy. You just beautiful, just whistled then. I love that. You just went, woo sound. You join us. You join us in the fun. Dorothy, let's kick off with you. I want to know, because your experience has been so extensive over many years, what do you think has changed? How have you seen the landscape change when it comes to these ideas of consent and agency with our little people?
Wow. Well, my experience is so long because I'm old. That's
No,
why. That's why. You know.
I didn't say that.
So anyway, having reached my 70s, I now reflect on these questions in a historical way, intergenerationally. Makes sense to think about it in terms of my own family. You might want to think about your own families as I reflect. Both my parents were born close to the 1920s in Wales and in England, and they grew up in an era of poverty and for them, and children were to be seen but not heard, very high levels of authority, levels of physical discipline of children that would today be deemed child maltreatment in our society. They had very little agency, but nor did their parents have a lot of agency because of where they sat in a certain class social structure. And the women had even less agency than the men. Fast forward to post-war baby boomers, and we had vastly more agency, but there was no talk at all, at least not in my family and not in many other families, about issues that were bordering on privacy, sexuality, the names of body parts, that even certain things could happen to children or to adolescents or to adults. That was total taboo. And as a young social worker, as part of the team that established the first service for sexually abused children in this state, we had a lot of professional ignorance as well as community ignorance to overcome in acknowledging the very existence of that issue. If I fast forward to my children, I would say that there was even more agency. My daughter could choose to put on every colour in the rainbow, and I'd wince, but I think, oh, does it really matter? But I would say that it was moving in the direction. At school, they learned protective behaviours programs, so they at least had names for body parts. They had some principles about what it might feel like to feel uncomfortable and what they should do, and the hand of 5 that was on the fridge with the names of people they'd written they could turn to. If I fast forward to my granddaughter, a very assertive young woman of 7 now, she has a level of agency which astounds me. She knew as a toddler, her nappy being changed, she knew the names of body parts I didn't know until I was close to adulthood. And I'm really, I guess, reflecting on that change over time. So I think there's been a marked increase in agency, a marked increase in awareness and capacity to name things that were once unnameable. But I think as a playgroup movement, we need to think about how we frame this issue, framing it in terms of consent. If people are thinking about consent in terms of adult sexual relationships, would be very difficult for many in our community to accept. So I think we need to perhaps talk about respectful relationships, and we need to be very aware of the cultural diversity, that issues about gender, sexuality and authority will be some of the 3 most potent dimensions of any culture. We are a multicultural society. So I would urge us to use great discernment and wisdom and consultation as we think about how the playgroup movement might make a contribution.
Wonderful. I'm going to ask this question to both Liz and Dominic, but I'll start with you, Dorothy, while I'm with you here.
Got off the
Don't
board.
have any water. Do not drink your water yet.
The authority, I know how to be told what to do.
Yeah. No, I want to know, probably one of the most pressing questions around this is, at what age do we have these conversations around consent, respectful relationships? And of course, the way we have those conversations will be different depending on all the factors that influence the individual's life. But what is at the very top line, at what age?
Oh, I can't give an age, but what I can say is that I heard someone recently on some radio program, not sure which, talking about thinking in terms of 3 buckets. You're probably all familiar with this, but the decisions which a child may be developmentally mature enough to make that are self-regarding. So for my daughter, it was what colours she was going to wear, as long as clothes were right for the temperature. The decisions which a parent must exercise on behalf of a child, because it is their duty to do so, the duty of care to do so, about issues about wearing seatbelts and about health matters, and they must be, for a very young child, the discernment of parents. And then there is the bucket where we might make those decisions together. And I think that there is diversity in that within our wider community, but I think that's where we might start in playgroups and in modelling about a conversation about those things, respecting that we may not all be on the same page.
Wonderful. Liz, what's your sort of top line? Because we're going to dig into this, obviously, but just in your first reaction to that idea of what age and what stage?
So I suppose what I'm thinking of is phenomenal that all of us in this room have got so much knowledge and experience and expertise, but it's the parents that need to be having this understanding in order that they can make more informed choices about what they're going to do. And I guess it just takes me back, to the kind of understanding that from birth, babies are very capable of telling us what they like and don't like and want and don't want. And really for us as professionals supporting parents to realize that and to know that and to trust that. In terms of, how we set up our environments when we're working with families, noticing if children enjoy noise or maybe prefer quiet. And so really at that kind of really basic level is where choices and agency begin, I think. So that was my kind of immediate reaction to your question. And obviously then we're building up from that in terms of more, the more kind of fundamental questions in terms of as children get older and have more agency and more understanding of the bigger picture. But we need to recognize from birth that actually children have choices that we need to be listening to.
Incredible. I will come back and actually dig into the idea of what it looks like to have agency and to give consent. But I'll go to Dom first to see your reaction to that question as well about when.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with Liz on that. The idea that from birth, the children are telling us what they need, and we can pick up on the little cues, the body language, and even when you think about changing a nappy, or you think about play, whether they're just comfortable or whether they're ready. If you and you can pick up on what they need, I guess, and that's sort of part of consent. I think you can not just think of it as a verbal thing only. And so then, when we think of verbal, we're thinking maybe 2-3-year-olds telling us yes, no, and a lot of the times it's no from them. But thinking about that, there's more to it than that. I like that idea. And it makes me think of, I've got 2 younger kids, 6 and 9, and the way that sometimes we do consent is around if I'm just making sure they're comfortable, drop off at school, whatever it is, they're going to a new environment, doing swimming lessons or dance class, and I'm leaving them to go off on their own to do the thing. Just sometimes it's just a little thumbs up. We do a little thumbs up back and forth. Just I feel like that's consent as well. So I feel like there's lots of little things that we probably do already that could fall into the consent sort of category. But it's the checking in, whether it's verbal or non-verbal, that is important.
You've all brought up that really crucial aspect of consent and agency. And it's very prevalent for our young people in how much we listen to those expressions of yes and no. You've got a 3-year-old saying, no, I will not. How do we manage those complexities? What does consent look like, Liz, when we're talking about little people?
So I suppose, again, one of the things that in a previous life that I did was practice infant massage. So working with families who were particularly vulnerable, I suppose, in several ways. And always in that practice, we introduced to the families the concept of asking the child from birth, do you want this engagement or do you not? So it was literally, warming your hands because you're going to potentially touch a body, and checking out with the baby, is this okay? Are you ready for a massage? And babies can tell you, yeah, I'm cool with this. Well, obviously they can't go, yes, I'm cool with this. But, you will get that body language and that understanding. Babies will turn away if they're not in the mood for that. So I think sharing that kind of information with families from that very start, whether it's through infant massage or whether it isn't, whether it's, shall we change your nappy? Sometimes babies don't want to be whipped away from having a cuddle to get their nappy changed, and that's okay. Nothing terrible is going to happen if you just wait a few minutes longer for baby to wake up properly, or, so I think if we can set these kind of things in motion from the very earliest days, then there is a natural progression and families become more familiar with that kind of recognition that their child has got agency, which is much easier than to be considering, okay, your child's now 2, so what might this look like? And, if I'm obviously thinking through a PEEP Learning Together program lens, but if you've got a child where maybe the majority of people are sitting together singing a song, and you've got one baby that wants to crawl away, that's absolutely grand, because that baby's making a choice that actually at that moment they don't want to be joining in with everybody else. There's something else. And, again, reassuring parents that there isn't that expectation that everybody has to do everything at the same time. And see lots of people nodding. So, I know this is what you do, but I think we have to just keep giving these messages to parents to really tune into their children at whatever age and be able to respond to that with confidence in their own knowledge of their own child.
It's such a powerful shift, isn't it, from where we have come from. Dorothy, I'll go back to you in terms of that historical lens, because it really does inform where we are and those very important shifts that need to happen. Looking back at how, our parents and our grandparents were taught how to run a family. It was intrinsic around the authority, as you mentioned before. How much do you think we've shifted away from that, culturally, broadly speaking, in terms of listening to a baby or allowing a child to have agency over what they do in their lives?
I think it's hard to generalise about a nation as diverse as Australia, and that we would find enormous variations across our communities in that regard. And I do want to make the point that many parents have little agency. They often, in some contexts, exist within authority structures in their workplace. And it may not be surprising then that for some, ideas about maximising a child's agency may not make sense. I remember once an African-American social worker in the US explaining to me why she thought that the fairly matriarchal, authoritarian and very strict child rearing that she observed in some African-American families living in poverty was because the environment was so dangerous that those mothers wanted instant obedience, and they knew that to protect their children and keep them safe with guns, etc., there was not a lot of room for child agency. And I really took that on board and respect how the wider and the micro social environment will influence the degree to which parents will even wish to embrace the notion of agency in the child.
Such an important insight, understanding that whole family structure, not just looking at the child in isolation, and understanding the factors that contribute to particular environments that bring our children into the world as well. Dominic, I wanted to go to you on that point around the diversity that Dorothy's mentioned throughout this conversation. Families come from so many environments, so many cultural, they come from economic diversity, all the diversities that we can imagine. Of course, you're encountering them in play groups. How do you ensure that melting pot of diversity when we're thinking about things that we're talking about as an overview? We're thinking about consent and agency. How do you ensure that all voices are heard, I suppose, that there's agency and agency?
I guess it's really about, checking in with the community. I think with playgroups, the idea of a playgroup is come from a society in Australia that's quite a white background, white middle class background, and the idea and the places we have the playgroups as well. So I think it's really about actually asking the people in the community, what do you want? Is the playgroup the space? And where we're running playgroups and we want to talk about agency and consent, or we want to have a safe, inclusive place, it's really about that consultation and making sure that it actually meets their needs. And to Dorothy's story there, that not everyone's coming from the same background and has the same needs, I guess. If I put on my fatherhood hat, I'm thinking about that for dads to engage in playgroups and to talk about agency. That's a new thing as well, and I know Playgroups Victoria is doing a lot of great work to encourage those things to happen, but it's still quite and you look around the room and it's probably less than 5 men here and dads, and so encouraging even just diversity in genders in playgroups is a new thing, but the consultation piece is really important, and matching that with actually being flexible enough to meet those needs and actually saying, dads can't do weekdays, so it has to be a Saturday morning, so our server has to be flexible, and maybe dads don't want to meet at a service centre. Maybe they just want to meet at the park or a cafe or whatever it is. But then the needs for dads are that they want to do stuff with their kids, and that's what's most popular for them, and they want to get out there with the kids and meet other dads. So you're just trying to match up what you can offer and what they need.
The crucial aspect of the diversity of gender, how gendered this environment is, to make this an authentic community conversation, we need everyone in, really. How do we ensure, whilst we're still in this situation, that a whole family, that a whole kind of network of us is included in the understanding, I guess, of the conversation and where it starts?
Very good question. I think it probably starts in the home. I think it starts with the people in the family actually having those conversations. So when we talk about agency and privacy and consent, it's actually about the parents, the caregivers actually having those conversations with each other. It's one thing for playgroups to provide a space where it feels safe, but it's got to be an organic thing, that this is a normal thing for them to be talking about or aware of. I'm not sure if it answers the question, but...
No, I think the answer is, but Liz has got her little flicker of a hand.
All I was just going to say was, over the last couple of days, actually, there's been a number of people that have said, but you don't know what you don't know. And I think that's, so important to kind of keep up there, because, yeah, absolutely, it needs to start within the home, but we need to make sure that information is getting out so that there is more informed choices being made, and those kind of discussions can then be had in a much more meaningful way, I think. There's so many things that are rushing through my head that I'd like to say, but I do think that's one of them. It is again about, just making sure that we're sharing some of our, how I like to think about, particularly, I suppose, again, with the PEAP program in mind, is that kind of high-level research, information that we know makes the biggest difference. those relationships that we've talked about, what happens within the home and community that we've talked about. So we're sharing that research, but in a really accessible way that's totally meaningful for the people that we're working with on an everyday basis. Does that make sense?
And that's a really key point. And you mentioned it before, Dorothy, is even sometimes the terminology consent. It's been loaded now. There's some aspects of this have been kind of taken by certain, ideologies that have made that a difficult proposition. And of course, as you mentioned, it takes us into some kind of idea of sexualized ideas of consent. What do you think we need to do with that? If the message is needing to find its way into homes and into environments, what is that message needing to be about fundamentally?
Well, it's not just about agency. I mean, agency is related to dominant values of individualism in Western society. They can end up in narcissism. So agency is one side of the coin, and we want to encourage agency, but we also want to encourage responsibility and obligations to others.
Write about that a lot, around that idea of the child as a citizen as well, the child as participatory and empowered by their role as well, not just a yes and a no binary, but more to where do they sit in the scheme of things.
Yes. So I think we need to be thinking of both those, so that while we, yes, quite rightly have good conversations, respectful conversations about the nurturing of agency, along with agency is the obligation to the other, the capacity to take the position of the other, and so that the relationship is a respectful one. And I think that there are little micro things happening in playgroups all the time. I mean, when the first playgroup I attended with my granddaughter, I was shocked at her assertiveness toward the other children. And I was sort of like, oh my God, I got to see that. Can you see what she just grabbed? And so I think that you will have micro moments all the time that are not just about nurturing agency in children, but nurturing responsibility and respecting the rights of another who is already holding the object that you want. So I do think we need to have that conversation on both those parallel paths, and it is in the immediacy of a play group that those things are made manifest, they're very concrete, and that many of you will be able to model how to respond to that. I think that's where we begin.
That's really interesting. Dom?
I was just going to say, with the language that we're talking about today, the idea of agency, privacy, consent, I'll be honest, it's new language to me in coming, so I did a bit of reading, a bit of research about what it all means. I was like, oh, okay, I know what that is. I talk about that all the time. But I don't use the words agency, privacy and consent when I talk to families and talk to dads. So I think it's really important that we focus on language, because, and I'm a social worker, we're pretty good at using nice words to describe things. But when you go and talk to clients and families and use those words, or you say things like gender equality or consent, they have other things in their mind that you've got a really nuanced understanding. They've just might have a really, one.
Can I be obvious and ask that question? What is the response to people when you say gender equality and you say agency? Yeah. If you aren't hyper familiar with that terminology, what does it sound like?
I think consent sounds like something that I think they think of sexual consent. I think they think of what happens, and they're like, well, I've got a baby here. What are you talking about? Explore. So maybe the language that I think it's really important. I do lots of training with professionals, and language is so key. Sort of saying, don't go there and just say this is about gender equality. Say tell them how they're going to benefit from that. Tell them that they're going to have better outcomes, or they're going to have a healthier relationship, and they're going to enjoy being with their kids more and enjoy being with their partner more, or something like that. Something really simple that they can, I guess, digest or understand. Consent, I think, coming back to talking about even things like taking photographs, asking your children to decide on what you want to do next, getting your child to sort of make plans or something like that, where you're just guided a little bit. You've probably got your own version of what's going to happen for the day, but you've got some sort of informed decision making from them, and they feel part of that process, really. So I think language is extremely important.
I think it's a really important point to have made. Liz, I'd love to hear if you have thoughts swirling through that mind of yours that are about that, because I've got another question for you, but if you had anything to add to that idea of language and your experience with how this communication is done effectively.
Yeah, I guess, again, just, thinking about the you folks, the people that I've been kind of speaking about today, where, you're creating safe spaces where parents can take risks, can learn within a safe environment, knowing they're not going to be judged, knowing actually that they're going to have an opportunity to learn from other parents as well as from, you as a kind of facilitator. And I think one of the things that we do really consciously is wear our expertise lightly. So we've got, expertise and information, but actually we've also got an awful lot to learn from families who ultimately know their child better than we do. And it's that, again, coming back to that collaboration and partnership working that I think we have to take really seriously. And we're not expecting parents or indeed practitioners to get it right all the time. That's just not going to happen. But it's almost like it's more about the intention of trying to get things right, the intention of, having a good guess at what your child's trying to communicate. And if you don't get it right all the time, that's perfectly okay, because it's the process that's actually more important than the kind of, decision that you maybe make based on that.
And when we think about role modeling as one of the tenets, thinking about Playgroup as being that role model of it's actually okay to inquire, to make mistakes,
Absolutely.
to do the things that
all the time
we do to learn about other people in the world. We don't have to know everything about that to do that in a collaborative way. Can I ask you, while I'm with you here, you're obviously international. Where do you see this working well? Is there a model that you think, gosh, they've got that right? They've engaged a community. They've worked at this grassroots level to have these complex yet fairly simple conversations about how we are with each other.
I think a lot of things. I think that quite often in the UK, we do tend to look at Scandinavian countries who have got a lot of amazing things happening in the early years world, but it isn't, as we all know, it isn't as simple as just plopping something out of there and pulling it over here and it's going to work equally well. I am genuinely absolutely thrilled about the trip that Sally and I have been able to do here. It's my first time that I've been in Australia, and I think we're doing stuff really, really well in terms of, me from Scotland, Sally from Oxford, and you guys from all over the place, all over your country, just having this, sitting here on this panel and having this kind of dialogue. And I know that, my colleague Claire there, who I've only just met this week, we're going to have more conversations about some of the issues that have come up over the last week and really try and push forward. So I think we're doing it really well. I suppose one little bit of a kind of example from Scotland is we just, Aberdeen, some of you may or may not know Aberdeen, north of Scotland, quite an industrial city. They've been delivering the People and In Together programme for 20 years. They just had their 20th anniversary a couple of weeks ago. And they have developed, I was super interested to hear about the intergenerational work that some of you are involved in. That was one of the projects that they've been doing. And actually they had a lady aged 105 at that event, at that celebration, with a 6-month-old baby on her lap. So it was just a beautiful example of what can be created. And I think they're such a good example of really trying to work collaboratively with their community to think about actually what do we need, because again there are common themes that we will all kind of share, but within our locality, within our smaller communities, there will be things that are very specific that we want to look at much more individually. So that doesn't really answer your question, but I feel
No, it does. Maybe? No, it's good. I mean, this is like the whole point of this is that we are developing and establishing
Absolutely.
common ideas and language, not that we all have to agree on this, but that we share some way
Yeah.
of navigating these
Yeah.
conversations.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting to know how it's working elsewhere in other contexts as well. I love that you brought up intergenerational, Dorothy. I was about to go to you, but I want to know what you want to say.
Oh, I just wanted to pick up the issue about the language again. And this sounds like the sort of thing you'd expect an academic to say, but I think if we could be guided by some very good research on what type of language resonates with across the community and within different parts of the community, that would be very helpful. For example, if we're talking around young children, a fair go for boys and girls will get us a lot further than gender equality, you know, with most people in our community. So let's try and test out whether a fair go for boys and girls resonates. I was recently watching a wonderful seminar by the Joseph Rowntree Foundation in England using, I think it's the Frameworks Institute in the UK, and it was really about housing and poverty, but they were talking about being very well informed by research when it comes to using language that you wish to change in the policy setting. And they used the example of childhood obesity in relation to some of the public health measures that we could take to reduce childhood obesity. And when they test the community through surveys on that, you don't get very far on preventing childhood obesity. But if you use the term improving child health, you get a much higher acceptance of those public health measures around availability of food, pricing of food, advertising of food in children's television time, etc., etc. And what really struck me was the research which underpinned this. So when they're talking about housing, they now talk about homes. And we know intuitively the word home has so much more rich emotional nuance than the word housing. So I think we need some really good rigorous research on the language we use and how different parts of our community may respond to that terminology and how that terminology gets translated so that we can all have a conversation and we know what we're talking about and we're using words that are not loaded.
Yes, because the loading can happen post haste, you know, in terms of, and we know that it does, and half the time we're midway through kind of having these conversations with particular terms that have been used for other purposes. I think that's really insightful. What I was going to ask you about was that intergenerational thing, and going back to that idea as child, as citizen with responsibility. Now I can't remember what I was going to say. Something absolutely incredible. I think it's about whether we are doing that well, that collaboration, you know, with the whole team, with the child centered in a working world around them.
Well, I'd love to get off my hobby horse as children as contributors and say that our culture has robbed children of the opportunity to be valued as contributors. We have turned them into clients and beneficiaries. But that's a whole new issue, and I don't want to derail it. But that is about a child's agency and about a child being valued for doing developmentally appropriate tasks which are of benefit to others. And I think modern Western society has completely lost the plot on that. And it would be helpful if we, and I've spoken about this in various places, about rediscovering opportunities for children to make a difference to others, be that plants, animals, fellow humans, and the sense of agency, but also being valued that comes from that. That is, we're talking about an interdependence. We're not talking about autonomy from just an individualistic cultural perspective, but an interdependence.
And it's a shift in choice making as opposed to being told you must. I choose to participate and to be valuable. I choose to have responsibility. Is that where the agency comes in?
Well, yes. I mean, there's Michael Rutter, Professor Michael Rutter, foremost English child psychiatrist, talked about the importance of children wanting to care for others, not being made to do it because it's their duty. I don't think it's going to cut very far in our society if it's imposed as a duty. And I think he was spot on. And then the roots of that, of wanting to help another goes back, of course, to very early childhood, to attachment, to empathy, to the capacity to love and be loved. And so we have to build on that foundation in a profound way. But I do think that if we can find meaningful roles, even in a play group, and you probably do this every day, packing up things, etc., where parents and children can feel that they belong and they're contributing in a place where there is mutual respect for rights. And I wouldn't even use the word rights, because I think the word rights is loaded. I think we need to do a lot of work in unpacking some of these major constructs like gender equality rights. Can we find other ways of talking about those that will get us further in our conversations?
Which theorist do I quote to my 11-year-old to tell him he has to do the dishwasher again? I'll get that off you later. In talking about some of the big stuff, Dom, you do a lot of work in that, and we'll say the word gender equity, breaking down some of the stereotypes. The work that's naturally happening in play groups is such an important part of this. Do you think we're doing enough? Are we conscious enough about it? Are we too conscious? Where is that line? Because there's a flip happening as well around that, oh, look, you know, can we just be boys and girls, or whatever the issues are around that?
I think, as I said before, that play groups is definitely a gendered space now, and it's definitely something that I think everyone's mindful of moving towards changing. You know, and the idea of not just the parent's gender, but the child's gender is something that's new. And it's really tricky, I think, as parents today to it's not something you were raised with, so you don't have that experience from your own childhood necessarily, seeing lots of, seeing things, gender diversity sort of normalised, and even the way you were raised by your parents, they definitely didn't see that. I think I might have seen a little bit coming through in high school, but that was it, and sort of knew, didn't know much about it. But I think it's so much more, so much more common these days that it's actually challenging for the parents just to figure out how they're managing that, or how they want to approach it, or whether it's it's an issue at all. And let alone being in a playgroup space, and for you guys here as facilitators and leading that, to be aware of and supporting that. I can think of my nephew who loves to wear dresses all the time, and it just has since he was could wear clothes, and the childcare just really kept checking in with the parents a lot of the time. Is this okay? How is he going today? And just sort of treated him almost with too much enthusiasm, that they just wanted to be really supportive. And I think so they were like, it's okay, just you don't have to ask questions, just he just is, and that's how we see him. He just is. And so I think it was great that they were checking in with the parents, and that's a good way to go. But I think trying to just go along with the parents' sort of approach is important. But then maybe the parents don't know how they feel about it as well. So.
It's really interesting. I love that proposition that maybe wouldn't it be wonderful if we could just be? What a great simple idea that has somehow been very complicated and convoluted in the way that we have structured our world. Liz, I felt energy from you with everything that Dom. I'm intuiting here. You've got things to say.
It was just lovely, because the comment that you made there just made me remember a real situation. My son's 25 now, but when he was maybe 3, he was into the tutus and the ballerina dresses and things. And we went along to a party, a children's party, and there were a row of princess dresses and there was a row of wizards costumes, and he made a beeline for the princess costumes, and the lady that was kind of hosting it kind of ushered him away from the ballerina outfit, and I could see him like not impressed at all. So anyway, lo and behold, he did get a tutu on and had a thoroughly lovely party. And it was that thing about, I was super aware. I mean, at home, we just had lots of opportunity to kind of do different things. But there was that real pressure, even for me as a parent with quite a lot of knowledge and understanding of he's going to be the one that's a wee bit different here, which has been the theme of his life, which is just fabulous because he just is. And I love that, bringing it back to that. And he looks more like a Viking than a ballerina now, but it was a process, it was a process.
A little bit of Braveheart going on. Now we're going to actually open it up to questions in just a moment, but I guess, a final word in some way from you three around this idea. We haven't spoken specifically about privacy and about that digital footprint. Maybe a word on that, because I think it's something that we're facing constantly and the complexity of this is growing all the time. Do you have any hard and fast perspectives on this, Dorothy? You would have seen this whole cultural shift in spaces.
Yes. Well, as someone who's never been on any form of social media, I'm probably a minority in this room and have no intention of being on it. But just an example, to use the final slide I showed today of my granddaughter peering into the pumpkin flower, I asked my son and his partner if I could do that. And they said, yes, as long as the PowerPoint doesn't go on the internet. And I checked with Danny to see if I could be faithful to that obligation, because they have not allowed any images. She's now 7. They have not allowed any images of her on social media at all, because they wish to allow her to determine what images of her will be in that world. That's something that as a parent I never had to consider. And so I'm really interested in how this generation of parents is negotiating that, and how grandparents need to get their head around this and to not and to respect the discernment of their adult children in relation to their children.
Liz, your thoughts on that? Because this comes back to how do we get consent effectively from a minor?
Yeah. Again, I think it's such a, it's a whole topic in itself, I think, because technology is changing so rapidly, I'm sure I'm not on my own here, but it's like, there are new things all the time that we are trying to keep up with, and it's now impossible to do so. So again, I will answer your question. And again, I hate to, my poor son would be so mortified if he knew that I was drawing on his little stories. But out there in the ether somewhere is a video of my son, aged 13 probably, thinking it was a cool idea to get his friend to record him eating from a chili pepper. And so, in hindsight is a wonderful thing, isn't it? Hindsight's a wonderful thing. So it's out there somewhere. And again, I think what we need to keep doing is having these conversations, making sure that people have an understanding of consequence and therefore having a choice. So in terms of children thinking about the spaces that we work in, they can tell you if they would like their photograph taken or they would not like their photograph taken.
But they don't fully understand the entire concept.
Sure, absolutely not. But they do understand, though. I think we use imagery and photography and we show them. So again, it's about sharing that information so that they do understand at their level what that means. And again, for parents to understand the bigger picture, because some parents don't, consider what you've just described in terms of taking images, sharing them all over Facebook for the world to see. And that's the reality, potentially, for the world to see. So again, for me, it's about sharing that, the understanding that we have, and the risks that are associated so that people are in a position of informed choice.
Wonderful. And Dom, for you, have you got a perspective on this in terms of the idea of privacy and how you speak with families about this?
Yeah, first I would like Dorothy's comment about grandparents asking their children for consent and their agency, and then those parents then asking their children. I like the idea that generationally we're doing that. But coming to, social media is quite tricky, and I think it's important not to just to call it social media. I think to using the different platforms and actually understanding them because they do serve different purposes. Instagram just being photos only, and there's no sort of words attached, and using whatever WhatsApp or TikTok or whatever it is. Just maybe there's different methods and usages for social media that I think parents are trying to understand. And again, they weren't raised with this stuff, so it'll be the next generation that'll probably have a much of the parents that have grown up with social media that will have a much better understanding of how to manage
They
this.
won't, because they'll have robot children.
Yeah, there you go.
Controlled by AI.
There you go.
No
Good.
hope.
Is WhatsApp social media?
Yes.
Then I am on social media. I didn't even know that.
No.
Well done.
Thank you, Doc.
Being corrupted,
I've been
Dorothy.
corrupted.
Well done.
Fantastic.
Welcome aboard, Dorothy.
Oh, no. What have I done?
I say that, but that's the only social media I ever use. But just again, the idea that there's no experts out there knowing what they're doing. Everyone's just winging it, and the social media companies, and they benefit from that. But I think it's so important, and I don't do it enough, but I'm just thinking about, we were just on a holiday, and just the idea that it's like telling your kids to, oh, come on, just let's get a good one. Can you just smile for this one? And you're just taking 10, because on a phone you can take 10, 20 shots. You're just like, I'll just keep pressing it and we'll get a good one. And then it's just sort of the idea that if you put yourself in their shoes, and I think that's sort of, again, the language you use. So putting yourself in their shoes is a nice way to say, well, would you like it if I just came up to you and was like, Liz, can you just smile, Liz? Can you just, can you just face me and just, stop mucking around? And so that idea of putting yourself in their shoes of, well, if an adult did that to you, how are you going to feel? And that adult probably said, is this okay? I'm going to put this on social media. Is this okay? So it's never too early to ask, but I think you can get that, coming back to the beginning, the non-verbal sort of cues around, because they're not comfortable with it and they're just playing, and you can see it's a beautiful shot, but you're just like, I just let this one go. That's okay as well. So I think it's probably quite individual for parents, and again, maybe if there's practitioners here checking in with them, and in a playgroup space, being mindful of other kids and parents and what they need. It's the checking in that's important.
And even at that smaller level, what you think is a beautiful photo of your child that your child does not agree is a beautiful photo of them is their right to declare as well. Such a fascinating, we could do this all day, Liz.
Good. I'd be okay with
Go
that.
and hang out in your hotel.
Yeah.
Just tell us where you are and we'll come and
Good
find
stuff.
you. If you have questions, we've got a couple minutes. It would be so good to get, obviously, your deep insight into what you're experiencing in your own examples of this idea of consent, whether the language is what you use, how you go about it. We'd love to have any questions from you. Yes, over there. Hello. There's a microphone coming to you. God, I know. Do you want to sing a duet together?
I'm sure anyone that's ever worked in early childhood has this question. I have a 1-year-old, and if I had to wait for her to give me the okay body language and face expression for a nappy change, she'd never have one. So I just want to know where that sits with the experience here.
Liz, do you want to kick off with that?
Okay, so I guess my thoughts would be, you will know when her happier times are. So, I mean, we're all doing the best we can, aren't we? Every one of us. Before we're anything else, we're just folks doing the best we can do. And that will mean sometimes we get it right. And that will mean sometimes, our little ones are not very impressed at all. But you're absolutely right. At some stage, she's going to need her nappy change. There ain't no doubt about it. So I guess it's just that, again, that conversation, that kind of trying to include her in something that has to be done. And how she might become more involved and more independent. Is she quite an independent little one? Yeah, so, that is her agency, isn't it? She's like saying, no, actually, I'm quite comfortable. I'd rather not. So it is, I think, just again about that, the conversations that you have, the communications that you have, and ultimately you have to make that decision because you cannot cope with the consequences if you don't, basically.
I reckon just upskill her and get her to do it herself.
Exactly. That's what you're working towards,
Just do
isn't
you
it?
right now.
That's what you're working
you.
towards.
That was a great question. Yes.
Just wanted to talk to, because I've noticed with children that, that we work with, that often when you give those choices, you also need to allow a lot of time and not rushing, to allow that agency. So just to you to speak to that a little bit.
Can I talk about? No, I'm joking. Who wants to, Dom? Yep.
Yeah, time and place for sure. It's like kind of like picking your battles. When you kind of go, well, is this the right time to have this conversation? I want to get some sort of consent or them to be involved in the decision making, but not this time. But we'll work towards it for the next time or something. So, it's maybe then the nappy changes. It's not always going to be ideal, I guess. So, and I wouldn't say everyone does it perfectly, but working towards, some sort of, arrangement where you can check in with each other, knowing when they're in the right place to give you that feedback, whether they're old enough to talk. And it's probably about what you know about your child. If they're really assertive, then you've got to know their starting point, I guess, know that they're going to be really keen to do this thing. So how can you, minimise the sort of harm, or how can you make it a safe place for them?
And I suppose keeping it simple, it's not, let's not make it too complex. So, again, as you all know, age and stage dependent. So saying to a child, what would you like to wear today? And all of the drawers being thrown out until they decide, or do you want the red jumper or the blue jumper, is a very different scenario, but that's still giving choice and agency to the child. So, and all of that stuff in between, because you'll know your children better than anybody else. But yeah, that's kind of where my brain went,
I'd probably want to move away from the nappies. It's a long time since I've
Stay with the
changed one.
nappies.
But I would say the issues around physical shows of affection, I wouldn't be turning and asking the child and giving the choice. I would actually leave that. I say that because I belong to a generation where we were told to go and kiss grandparents. Then the next generation, and that was never exploited or abused for me, but it would have been for some. For my children, I'm not sure now, so I can't give you an honest answer whether I said go and kiss Nanny or Pa. I really don't know, but maybe I did, and it certainly would gratify me to see that affection between my late mother and father and my children. So I can well imagine I may have been tempted to facilitate that. I notice with my grandchild, she has never been encouraged, coerced, or told to touch me, to kiss me, to hug me. So when she did, of her absolute own volition, it was pure gold. So,
Beautiful. I want to hug you, but I will ask for consent.
you're allowed to.
I will ask you if I'm allowed to. Unless, there is a burning question. I can see your eyes. It's burning. Last question here.
This relates back to previous generations. There is often grandparents who are uncomfortable with children having a say, or they often don't respect the parents' ability to recognise their children's consent. An example I'm thinking of is when a child gets tickled and the grandparents tickle and they say stop and they don't. Yes. I've recently observed that, and I said to the other person, said stop, and they're like, what? I'm like, consent. And they just looked at me like I was saying something ridiculous. But I find that that's something that's very common, the differences between generations. And do you want to make any comment about how we deal with that, or any advice about that?
I don't have any advice, but I think you're absolutely right. When you've had a rapid historical transition over just 2 or 3 generations, you will have intergenerational differences, and you could even have deep offence being taken, and in some families you could get an emotional cut-off, which would just be just so tragic in a family. So I do think we need to be aware of this, and again to find ways that not implying to grandfathers that they're pedophiles, or that grandmothers are doing things they should, even though you think they are. I don't know, but let's think about how that gets framed, the language we use, and how to have those difficult conversations, because they could be toxic in families. But to not have the conversation would be to betray the child. So I don't have a quick answer, but I think we need to really go down there and explore that further.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Generations are the answer, but they're also complex in some of that change. Anything from you, Liz?
Yeah, I suppose, again, just thinking about the opportunities that you have within your playgroup spaces, thinking about what opportunities, with that example in mind, what opportunities exist for you to kind of address that kind of thing. The kind of conversations and interactions that you have, whether it's through a story or just a discussion about, what is and isn't acceptable, or do you like being tickled as an adult? Some people can't stand their feet being touched, me being one. It's that kind of stuff. So it's just dialogue about, how we feel as adults, and then trying to consider that in terms of through the eyes of the child, and how unsafe that can feel. So that's kind of ORIM for those of you. I'm sure all of you were listening on, but in terms of ORIM, just what opportunities and recognition and interaction, how do you model that kind of behaviour so that parents are, again, learning more and being able to be a bit more informed.
And Dom?
I just feel like it's not necessarily entirely a generational thing, that issue, and that, so when education comes into it, that's going to really help. But just thinking that it might just be about, educating people of all different ages around what is okay, and then if a child's saying, I'm not comfortable, in their language, then, that's something you just need to listen to. When you think about going back to the photographs sort of discussion, that I can think about, I'm going to use an example of my own sister who just persists in taking photos, and when we had young babies, and just it'd be up on social media within a minute before you could even talk about it. So I feel like it's quite similar, where it's just sort of in their space, it's shared, it's sort of, she's done what she's decided, she's gratified her needs. And so I think they're kind of similar sort of attitudes, and so maybe it's just about the education and having those conversations with them, that in ways they can understand, and dealing with their attitudes and their behaviours.
Danny, you just touched your nose. Is that a message to me? Just did that. It's like, very good. It has been a real pleasure, honest. It's so great to sit here and to talk about, this world of play and how important it is to community, and how there are really important aspects for us to consider when we are coming together as community around, maybe not consent. What was the other thing we were going to say? Fairness for boys and girls.
Well, that's the gender
and
bit.
non-binary children, students, kids.
Respect
Let me
for
stop talking. Why am I talking? Thank you so much. Please, round of applause for Dom, for Liz, and for Dorothy. Thank you.
A round of applause for Jacinta. Sorry, just changed her name. Thank you all so much, and it was a really exciting but also important discussion, and I think that's part of what it is. This is all about. This is about discussion and working out what works for us at the time that it needs to work. So thank you all for coming. I just would like to say one or two last things. The first thing is, this sort of thing doesn't happen without a lot of work, and so I just want to take this opportunity, and I know that they're not going to like this, but there's sometimes in my role I can ask things of other people, and this is one of them. So I'd like to ask my staff to stand up, the staff of Playgroup Victoria. Can you please all stand up? And I want everyone to have a look around and